Okay. Is this our sound system person?
I am.
And your name is?
My name is Steve.
Steve.
I will make sure you guys get moving here, and if there's no hiccups, I'll probably sneak out the back door.
Okay.
And we're live streaming on the city website or on Facebook and on,
Do we have no
YouTube.
YouTube. Does
I
this
haven't heard
mean
anything, Alonzo. I'll ask.
We're not allowing public in this meeting now,
Oh, yeah, we're allowing public in.
if they want it.
They just haven't come tonight.
Okay, not yet anyways.
So, does anybody know anything about Alonzo? I didn't ever get an email. Roberta, that was a no as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I was just looking for a shake of the head. Okay, then Roberta, as soon as you're ready, we'll be ready to go.
I'm ready.
So what you're streaming is.
So wait until, now you've gotta wait for them too. But
Okay.
Roberta can start, but
See,
don't gavel it until we're live.
Okay?
Are you ready, Jim?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
Okay, so am I.
Good evening and welcome to the Crestville City Council Work Session, January 24th, 2022. Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. So I will announce at the beginning that we are down one counselor, Counselor Castillo, and this is an unexcused absence. I have not heard anything, nor has our city recorder or city manager today. Want to welcome our two new counselors. This is their first work session, Norma Jean Osborne and Tammy Sue Shuck. So welcome very much. So I think that tonight, for safety's sake, and because we're all in very close proximity, I would recommend that we go ahead and keep our masks on, and if you just can't quite do that, drop it just when you speak, and then bring it back up. Okay? So, first of all, with the mayor's report, I wanted to mention that we received a resignation letter which will appear in the next council packet from Jonathan Riddle, who has moved out of the area and who's resigning from the planning commission. So we now have one vacancy on the planning, two vacancies on the planning?
on planning.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jonathan was on the budget committee. So we have one on budget committee, one vacancy?
Two, you have Jonathan's and Philip Smith's.
Okay, when I looked online today, Jonathan was not listed on the council, only Philip Smith, so we can double check on that. So we do have for sure one vacancy on budget committee, possibly two. We have one vacancy on planning commission because of Tammy Sue, and we have one vacancy on parks because we looked and discovered that indeed the Parks and Trees is a 7-person commission.
Okay.
So, I just want to encourage you, one of our tasks is connecting with our community and recruiting. So those positions are all open until filled, and they can go online and get an application or come into City Hall and get one, and then they just need to make sure it gets back to Roberta. So just be thinking of people that you think would make a great participant, servant in our community in some of these different capacities, and talk to them and encourage them. Okay? Second thing I wanted to do is to have Michelle give us an update on strategic planning.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I have spoken with Michelle from Berry and Dunn, and we've set up a meeting for the department heads, and that'll be February 3rd. We're going to get together and we're going to start the process. And also, we've set the kickoff for City Council to be at the February work session.
Do we know how much time we're gonna allot for that February work session?
No.
Okay, so just be prepared at the February work session. We have all kinds of committees giving reports and a kickoff. And does that also when we do our goal setting for the year, Michelle, for you. So just be prepared, the February work session will be a long one, okay? All right. So anything else, Michelle?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we go to committee reports. Now, if I'm not incorrect, we have no report from administration, or public safety, or transportation, or parks, or parks and tree, or airport.
Unless you want one from Parks and Trees.
Okay, because the charge did not include a report from any of those committees tonight.
Oh, okay.
Now, if the committees are met and you just want to give us a progress report, you're welcome to do that. But the charge had reports for February from almost all those committees.
Okay.
Norma, did you want to give an update on your meeting?
Well, we elected a new chair and secretary, which was Riley Newman and Bonnie Samuels for the secretary. Stuart Samuels suggested that we organize work parties from not just us, but people in the community to help work on the parks, have some sort of plan. And Ms. Rose suggested that we start with grasslands and do some cleanup there. And see how that works, if we can get people to donate their time quarterly or yearly or however we want to set it up. And Arbor Day this year will be a tree giveaway because of the pandemic. We're still not going to be planning in person, large groups of people. And we're working on park wayfinding signs to help. It was suggested that if we had signs that pointed out where some of the parks were, like Grasslands doesn't have a sign showing people how to get to it. It's really not an easy place to find, so they're gonna work on the sign. Those are the most important highlights as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. All right, so that brings us down. Alonzo, we're down to committee reports. And the first 5 committees didn't have a report scheduled for tonight, unless you want to give us an update on any airport commission meetings.
Yes, sir. So we met last Wednesday, the 19th, and, excuse me, apologies for being late. Chair Jim Origlosio, he reported that he had been working with the regional group, Disaster Recovery Planning, and there will be an exercise coming up June 18th, and it will be an airlift taking supplies to the coast. And he also commented that he would be working with Manager Humble on to what extent they would be involved. And then she proceeded to give us a quick the core grant updates. And there was a grant in place for the emergency generators, which will be put on the airfield, which should be here in February, so they can wrap that project up. You guys have heard about those generators for a while. And then there was another core grant out for the EOC, but it's kind of on hold right now due to other projects that are taking precedence. And then Manager Humble is working on another grant that will help offset the 10% match for the runway rehab project. And if we get it, it's a little fuzzy, but if we get it, then we would be responsible for 1% of the 10% match, which would be a big help, because that's a huge project. It's like $4 million. And then she's also applying for another grant, which sounds like a much better grant. That's the Connect Oregon grant. And it sounds like if that one goes through, then we don't pay anything. So that would be great. Okay, so then the runway update. The runway design is out for bid. Yay. And there is a pre-bid meeting January 28th for prospective bidders. And it's a mandatory meeting that they have to have for questions and answers and whatever comments. And then the bid opening will be February 19th, where they actually will start going through the bids. And then tentatively the airport will be closed August 15th through September 28th. That's 6 weeks. It sounds like a lot of work to get done in 6 weeks, but hopefully they'll do it. And then the North End development, the latest design for that wastewater system actually came in on the 19th. And then the next step is to gather info for the RFP, and depending on funding, then this project could start this summer. And then, the Airport Commission voted to approve the updated airport rules and regulations draft, and they should be coming before council soon. And then we elected our new chair will be Sid Voorhees, and the new secretary will be Jim Origloso. So they kind of swapped roles for 2022. And so then we proceeded to look over the material per our charge. And our new 2022 chair, Sid, will be here to give the annual report outlining accomplishments of 2021 and the work plan for 2022 at the February work session. Okay, and then our next regular quarterly meeting will be in April, the 20th.
Wonderful.
That's all I have. That's a lot. We had a lot of stuff to go through.
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, so LCOG, I'm the representative now to the board. We have a meeting on Thursday. Those meetings are all Zoom, so I'll be involved in that Thursday night. Lane Act, Shelley.
Yeah, so Lane Act meets monthly, second Wednesday of each month. So we've already met for the month of January. And we had a very active meeting, as we usually do. So a couple of really exciting things, I think in particular for the city of Cresswell, is that we elected new leadership for Lane Act. It was really important for me to serve on that recommendation for leadership board because I wanted to make sure that cities the size of Cresswell were well represented and had a voice at the table. So those that we elected, so typically what happens is if you serve as vice chair, then the next year you kind of transition into the chair role. We decided to mix it up, and the folks wanted to mix it up this year, so I am pleased to share that Manager Humble was elected as chair for Lane Act. So if you see her, please congratulate her. She just jumped right into that chair role, and I think will be just a fantastic representation both of Lane Act as well as the city of Cresswell in that leadership position, and so that's very exciting. So Mayor Van Gordon, who is the mayor of Springfield, is continuing to serve as vice chair for the next year. And then we also looked into the bylaws of Lane Act, and we discovered that there was a position written into the bylaws that had just largely gone just unnoticed and unfilled for a couple of years, and that is the role of ambassador. So it's essentially somebody else who helps to serve on the leadership steering committee, and we were able to help convince Heather Buck, who is one of our county commissioners, to serve in that role. So voted unanimously from Lane Act, and so that was very exciting for us. And so I hope that I will be able to continue to serve on that leadership recommendation committee, because I think that that's really important for the city of Cresswell as well as other cities the size of Cresswell, because that is largely what is represented in the county, in Lane County. I was going to say in the county of Lane, but that feels very formal. So that happened, and then we also spent quite a bit of time talking about the Highway 126 project out in Veneta, and so we're talking, or what we talked a lot about was essentially expanding the road. Highway 126, there's actually a lot of death and accidents that occur on Highway 126 because it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and not really in the middle of nowhere, but it's outside of city limits. It's just a single lane, and there's a lot of traffic that goes through it. In fact, Franny Brindle from ODOT talked a little bit about the amount of traffic or the volume of traffic that goes between Junction City and Eugene, between kind of out towards Dexter Lake, and It was astounding how much more traffic goes through Highway 126. And so that's been really important, especially for the city of Veneta, to be able to expand that road and be able to get more funding and really get the support of ODOT and be able to get some works expanding that road underway, because that's just going to help promote safety. At the same time, there's some pretty significant wetland and natural resources considerations. And so there was a lot of discussion about both how do we balance both preservation of life as well as preservation of the wetlands as well, because that's right next to Fern Lake. So we actually ended up bumping one of our presenters because the conversation went quite a bit over, and they're going to be rescheduled to come into the next week, but that was happening, or we had that conversation. And then we were able to talk just a little bit about ODOT projects and their prioritization of upcoming projects and some money that goes along with that. So in that presentation from Franny, we learned about some exciting stuff that's coming up for the city of Cresswell the railway crossing and some stuff coming up this summer. But there's a couple of $1 million worth of a project that's coming our way, which I think will make a huge impact for the city of Cresswell. So I'll let city planner Maddie Phillips talk a little bit more about that, as she is much more knowledgeable about that project than I am, and what those impacts may be. And I think the planning committee is also going to talk a little bit about that as well, because it's going to have some summer impacts, but just exciting stuff. Lane Act, folks. It's a committee that's happening.
And we are glad that you are on it representing.
Enthusiastic about it.
Yes, yes, very important. Our former mayor was one of the ones who created the whole Lane Act prior to me. So Cresswell has a long history with Lane Act.
Well, between myself, Manager Humble, and then Maddie Phillips, we will have good representation and good presence. So I think it's really important for the city of Cresswell and cities the size of Cresswell to be well represented and have a voice.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, so we do have a report tonight on the ad hoc town hall committee. Who was selected chair? Was it Kevin?
Yes, sir.
All right,
So
Kevin.
you can see who either won or lost the coin toss on that one. I was trying to convince Alonzo to do it. So what I can say is that, yes, I am the chair, and then Shelley is going to be secretary. And the committee met for the first time last Monday. The topics that we started off with were to first begin to discuss who else would be involved in that committee, who we would be reaching out to. And from there, and I'll come back to that in a second, then we kind of started to review objectives, the who, what, when, where, how, and whys. Got a few different things worked out on that one. And then I shared with and brought basically a list of tips that I had found on the internet, quite extensive, for just a discussion starting point for what elements are of a successful town hall meeting. That actually kind of helped us to then begin to think about the types of things that we are considering out of scope, because sometimes it's easy to at least kind of say that these are the things that we're not planning to do, so that it kind of gets you to the things that you do want to do. So we did say that we are looking to avoid debates or arguments or finger pointing, and to really come at it with a positive approach, something that's maybe even more uplifting and can offer hope. Acknowledge our weaknesses and yet find ways that we can do better. It's okay to do that. So then, as we started to look at those things, the committee members we as a committee decided that we wanted to reach out to Joel from the school district, Joel Higdon, Bobby from the chamber, and Sergeant Denham for sure, from Missouri LCO Sergeant. And then, this is where it gets kind of interesting, is that because of the potential for some decision-making that would involve those groups, then the discussion became, should those become members of the committee? So we talked about that. There was support around that idea, and that's one of the things that I think that we would want to share back tonight and discuss with the rest of you as to whether that's a good idea. Do they need to be on the committee to participate and be effective, or so I kind of want to make sure that the other committee members have a chance to kind of share about that as well.
So where do you want to go right with now?
So well, first of all, I'm hoping that that's a helpful update as far as what we were talking about. The meeting was about 50 minutes long. There was a couple of other things that we thought that we might be able to do in terms of possibly collecting questions that people might be interested in asking at the town hall ahead of time. Because if we were able to actually get that out there sooner than later, then it would give us the kind of a better idea how to form our agenda and to form the presentation of the meeting. So if there's like any themes that come out in the questions and stuff like that. So we wanted to be able to offer a chance at the town hall itself, but at the same time, the more that you can have going into it, then the better prepped that we will be. So I did want to share that other piece of it. So I think that what we're looking for is guidance from the rest of the council as to whether we should ask those folks to join the committee or not. And maybe arguments for and against would be a good one. There's the downside, I'll just go ahead and throw that out there, as we know, is that if we decide via consensus this evening that we wanted to do that, then it would be another 3 weeks, I believe, before we meet again as council. And so we wouldn't be able to take action until the next council meeting. So that would be 3 weeks, possibly, potentially, without them. But I don't know that doesn't mean they couldn't be invited. The committee meets again tomorrow evening, and they have been invited as participants.
So they have been invited,
Yes, as participants.
okay.
It would be nice to know whether they were interested in actually becoming members, because that's a time commitment. That's one of the negatives, that they may or may not be interested. I don't really know how to predict that.
You've asked them to come tomorrow, right?
Yes.
So you've asked representative from the school district,
Yes.
Chamber of Commerce, and our sergeant. Have they gotten back to you and said yes?
Yes, they will be there.
So they will plan to come.
Okay.
So, and this is something, I'm looking at here, committees. So I appointed an ad hoc committee. You can also appoint a citizen committee, which is different. The intention of the ad hoc committee was to be very short term, kind of get her done, with a deadline by the end of March, middle of March, we want to have it done. So you're wanting their input and their involvement on it, but because this is not a committee that's going to really be making any decisions other than bringing a plan to the council, so the council said, yeah, we're ready to go. And because it's a timely thing, and you're already meeting tomorrow, I don't know what value you have in having them formally appointed on the committee, as opposed to they're coming, you want their input, and you're gonna have it, they're gonna come tomorrow. So, that's just my thought.
That sums up exactly what I was thinking.
Well, and I think their participation is important for now as well as the future. But I think too that during that time period, it was really focused on the city and the council. And I think their participation and their opinions would be deeply valued. But as a committee member, it might look a little, because it's not actual council, or it's, city, even though, the sheriff works here and the chambers is involved, but I can almost see that as two separate. Because there is a lot of feelings and emotion out there with each, as we know, with every kind of, I almost see them as like different departments, so to speak.
Go ahead, finish, Misty.
Oh, so I think their participation is valuable. I don't know if I would have them as a committee member. And that's just my thought.
Michelle?
I think the rationale for having them on the committee was because these had a very real part in what happened in the 4th of July. And they each bring a piece of the answer, a piece of the story to the table. And that if we're going to have a panel or something like that, we need to have representatives we need to have the sheriff there, we need to have the school district there, we need to have the Chamber of Commerce there to explain what their role was in the situation.
And I agree with you on that. I just don't know if they should be actually a committee member.
I was a bit tossed on that one. I agreed.
I
when
can
we
see both
met,
ways.
And thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea because that kind of gives a little bit more teeth to it and some of the decisions. When I say decisions, they're decisions that basically come in the form of recommendations, but they're decisions to a degree as far as what to recommend. So at the same time, I could see the balance of that being that it might be tough to get them to commit to being on a committee if they have to be at every meeting. So, I don't know, I'm probably a little in the middle on this one, to be honest.
So how many meetings would be involved? Is it a monthly, bi-monthly?
At this point, it's probably more like weekly, unless we find that we don't need to meet as often, but at least in the beginning, it's going to probably be, and also subject to people's availability too, so, but.
So here's a thought. You could ask them. Now with our sergeant, he's an employee of the city, so I'm not sure about making him a formal member of the committee. You're on the committee because you're our staff representative to the committee. So we have staff members who serve on committees, but they're not, airport commission, things like that. They're not named to the committee. They're the staff person who is assigned to the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm not sure about naming Sergeant Denham as a name to the committee. But you could certainly ask Joel and Bobby, do you want to be named to this committee? And then we can do that in 3 weeks, but in the interim, they can certainly be invited, as the meetings are open to all members of the public. So they can certainly be invited, encouraged, pleaded with, whatever, come, help us. And if they say, yes, we'd like to be named to it, I have no problem naming to the committee. I just don't want to slow down your work in any way in order to do that. So you could ask them what they think.
Yeah, I think part of, I agree, and I think part of why we wanted to have them kind of named to the committee or whatever kind of formalized process is that and again, please tell me if I am taking the tone of our conversation out of context, is that I think that we really wanted to focus on partnership and moving forward together and planning together and taking a same-side approach. And so if we had them either on the committee or were intentionally involving them in the planning process, that was part of that same-side approach, and we wanted to move forward together and in partnership.
I like the approach mentioned. We can ask and see where it goes from there.
So we can really just give you input because this is a separate committee from the council, and the council doesn't have any authority really over your committee right now. That's already been given to you in the charge. So have you got input from us that would be helpful?
I believe so.
Okay. And keep marching forward, and we'll have another report at the February council meeting.
Indeed, yep.
And if you decide, and that you want them added, just let me know and I'll give a new charge next month, adding them to the committee.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So with that, we welcome our attorney, Ross Williamson. Come on up, Ross, it's all yours.
Good evening. My familiar, to many of you, slide presentation. Let's see, it's 6:30. My goal is for about an hour and a half. Because I find, even though I am so exciting to listen to, after that amount of time, people kind of zone out and it doesn't sink in anymore, so. Diminishing returns, as they say. Let's see if the tech works. Look at that. I suppose I have to be in front of the microphone, don't I, so everyone online can hear, huh? That's gonna be hard. I'm not very good at being contained. But I will do my best. So this is my council training for you all to describe kind of the basics of being a council member and serving on the council. And we're gonna talk through a few different areas. And I'm sorry I'm talking to the back of your head. It's rude of me, but I have to be somewhere, I suppose. So we're gonna talk first about council authority, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about public meetings, and then we're gonna talk very quickly about public records, and then we'll go into some ethics, and we'll get through as much ethics as we have time for. And then for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ross Williamson. I work at the Local Government Law Group in Eugene, and this firm and its different iterations, it was known as Spear Hoyt before it became the Local Government Law Group. We've worked with Cresswell for, I'm gonna guess maybe 16, 18 years or so. And I have personally worked with Cresswell for almost 12 years now. So we have a good, long relationship. I spend a lot of time in this community and care about this community. I care about the communities of all my clients, but Cresswell is near and dear to my heart. I live in South Eugene. I'm almost closer to downtown Cresswell than I am to downtown Eugene. So that's kind of fun. And my practice is only representing governments, so that's all I do. So this is my career, is representing small cities and other small local government entities like fire districts and sewer districts and water districts and things like that. So this is the scope of my practice is what I'm doing here today. And so I'm hopeful that I will give you a little, some nuggets of knowledge. I think the big takeaway is to give you a baseline of knowledge that then allows you to ask questions. I'm not trying to impart local government on all of you in 90 minutes, but hopefully you'll remember things, you'll take some nuggets away from tonight, and then 6 months from now, you'll say, oh my gosh, I think Ross said something about that. I'd better call Michelle, or I'd better talk to Roberta, because I think I have a question. And then we'll get that conversation going. We'll solve your problem, we'll answer your question, and we can go on from there. Because as I will talk about through the presentation, I want to keep you all out of trouble. You're doing a hard job, you're serving your community, and you're not getting paid to do it. So the least we can do is keep you out of trouble. And the city has some great insurance that covers you all, as long as you stay within the scope of your duties. And so I have stay in your lane is a signal I use a lot. And so as long as you're staying in your lane, then the city's got your back, and we've got insurance for you, and you don't have to worry about it. And so what I'm trying to do tonight is to keep you in your lane and know where those boundaries are. All right, so we're gonna jump in. And ask questions, please, anytime. I've even got some question slides to remind you to ask questions. Hearing myself talk for 90 minutes can get a little dull, so happy to have a conversation.
Russ, you can move around. We have a mic that will pick you up in the room. So
Excellent, look at that.
I'll let you know.
Set me free. All right. All right. So this is just a very introductory slide to introduce you to the concept of government. And in my mind, when I see this slide, I think of the notion that not every problem is a city problem. And this illustrates that because you have all of these layers of government. And not everything is a federal problem, not everything is a state problem, and not everything is a city problem. And I think we segued from your discussion about the committee, we were talking about the ad hoc committee and partnerships. And this is a great example of that too. So you have county partners, we partner with Lane County a lot. We county with other local districts. You've got a fire district next door, you've got the school district. And so we have other government entities that are separate entities, but sometimes we solve problems together. And so sometimes it may be a city problem, but it's a city problem that involves more than just us. And so we have to think about that as we're finding solutions. All right, so if you have identified an issue or a problem, this is the quick and simple two-part test that we go through to figure out whether the city council can act, whether you have the authority to act. And the first question is, do we have the legal authority? So is it a city problem? Is there a statute that gives us some authority? Do we have an ordinance already on the books that we can implement? Do we have home rule authority? There's something under the Oregon Constitution called home rule authority that cities have. Can we borrow that authority and use it to solve the problem? That's just the first question. Second question is what you're doing here tonight, and that's working as a group. Do we have a majority? And so it doesn't really matter what you individually may think is important or is key or essential if you don't have 3 other people on the council to vote with you. So being on the council, you may have campaigned to be on the council, you may have applied to be appointed to the council, and that was an individual effort. This is why should I be on the council? Why am I qualified to be on the council? That's individual. But once you get appointed, once you get elected, that goes away, and now it's all about teamwork. What can I do with all 7 of us? What can I do with at least 3 more people to get the job done? How can I work as a team?
Can I ask a question now?
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit
Troublemaker
about,
is back.
what?
The troublemaker is back.
Boy, makes me feel really good. You talk a little bit about home rule, because I know that's really a big deal, but not talked about a whole lot. In the booklet that you gave us, put out by the LOC, there's a really nice write-up on home rule. Can you give us a succinct understanding of that and how that would apply to Crestwell things? How is home rule important to Crestwell?
Sure. So the league manual that you're talking about has there's a whole chapter on home rule, and that's great reading if you really want to go in depth and figure it out. But if you want the little soundbite of home rule, the city of Crestwell was created by the voters through a city charter. And in Oregon, we say the power is with the people. And through that city charter, it gave all of the power that that a city can have has been given to the city council through the city charter. And so and maybe a way to say it is statutory beings like the fire district next door is created by statute. and they only have the power that statute gives them. We're the opposite. We have all the power unless someone takes it away. And it's taken away by the federal government through statutes adopted by the federal government or the federal constitution, or it's taken away by the Oregon Constitution or the legislature. They can preempt certain authorities. An example of that might be marijuana regulations. So even though we have home rule authority, we might say we have home rule authority to regulate marijuana. Well, the state of Oregon has said, no, that's actually, we're gonna do that at the state level. So it's even across the state. So every locality that wants to have marijuana can have it, but if you're gonna have it, it's gonna follow these rules. So we're preempted in a lot of ways from regulating certain aspects of recreational marijuana. So what would be an example of, we have general authority over nuisances in our city. So there's no statute that says, City of Crestwell, you can regulate nuisances. That's something that we said, we're gonna do that. We think that's a great idea. We don't want garbage in the front yards. We don't want junker cars on the street. So we, as a city, are gonna use our own authority, our charter authority, to regulate nuisances. And there's no statute that says we can't, so we're gonna do it.
So some things I think about is city-owned facilities like Cobalt Building, city-owned parks, city-owned streets. The city has the authority to establish how we use those things, how the public uses them, how much we charge to use the Cobalt Building. If we had hours of operation for the parks, for instance, use of our roadways. Are those applications of within the city boundaries, city-owned things? The city has the authority to determine the use of those things.
To some extent, but we can have a big discussion about how far does that go? Where's the preemption in some of that? So we have the authority to regulate our streets, but we can't say we're gonna raise the speed limit to 100 miles an hour in the city of Crestwell. So there's limits to that the federal government or the state government says, no, we don't think it's safe to drive 100 miles an hour on local streets, so we don't care what you say, city. We as a state say there's an upper limit. Or if we look at the federal system or the federal constitution, we have authority over the Cobalt Building, but we can't have discriminatory regulations.
Right.
So we can't say only white males are allowed on Wednesdays. The federal constitution would say, no, sorry, city, you can't do that.
Okay.
This is my slide that describes your individual authority as an individual city councilor. And unless you have been delegated that authority, you don't have it. So again, you may have been through an individual process to get onto the city council, but once you're here, you operate as a team. And so you really don't have any authority. There's no inherent authority in being a city councilor. You don't get a badge. You get the authority to vote. That's your authority. The mayor has a few specific delegations in the city charter. I believe he has to sign all ordinances and resolutions, and so that's an authority that is delegated to the mayor. He gets to run the meetings. That's an authority that's delegated to the mayor. But otherwise, even the mayor doesn't really have much individual authority unless it's actually been assigned to him by you all.
Like in the governing rules.
Right, yep. So this is my slide for some examples of what you, as a body of 7, some of your duties as a council. And I think the first bullet is probably the biggest. It's goal setting and policy making. So you as a body get together and meet and set goals for the future, set goals for your staff, and you make policy. You adopt ordinances, you adopt regulations, you adopt policies, and so you are the policy-making body for the city of Crestwell. As part of that, the second bullet is kind of a subset of that. I think part of your duty as a city councilor is to seek public participation, and you're doing that through your committee system. Again, you were just talking about that with the ad hoc committee. How can we bring in our partners? How can we solicit this public participation? And I also think you have a duty for some transparency in how you make your decisions. And so, example is we're here at a public meeting on YouTube or wherever it's being broadcast for anyone to watch if they want to. So that's the transparency. But I have a little parens there. There are limits. And so I personally believe, and I think it's shown out in the experience in my 20 years of practice, that sometimes there can be too much public participation. And so you as a body have to sometimes just knuckle down and make the decision. You know, we can't have one more committee. We can't have another meeting with public participation. Sometimes you just have to get down and make your decision. And so that's the hard work of being a city councilor. And I think also there are elements to transparency. Sometimes you can't talk about something with the public. So if we're meeting in an executive session and you're talking to an attorney about some ongoing litigation, you as a city councilor have an obligation not to be transparent about that, because that is a privilege held by the city, and you don't have the authority to waive that privilege. So there are limits to that. We're going to talk a little bit about your relationship with your CEO, your city manager. You have a couple employees, you have one employee and a couple appointees, and you are a supervising body. So you supervise your city manager. I think you, as a city council, have a role in risk management and oversight. I think you have an obligation to review the financials. You go through the budget process every year, and you authorize appropriations. And I think you are a check on that process throughout the year then to review those monthly or quarterly, I'm not sure how you do it, financial statements and say, hey, do I see anything amiss here? Should I ask any questions? And then I think we've already talked about it again tonight. You have a role for intergovernmental relations. I mean, you work with LCOG, you work with your other committees, and your partnerships with other governmental agencies. And so you delegate committee members to go out and spread the word of Crestwell and bring back information to you all as a body. And so if you delegate that role to someone, that person then has the authority to go out, attend those meetings, speak on behalf of the city of Crestwell, and come back and report. So let's talk specifically about one of those roles, your role as an employer. So your charter, which is this Constitution of the City of Crestwell, delegates the operations, the day-to-day duties to the city manager. So Michelle is charged by the people of Crestwell to operate the city. And that's her obligation. But you, as a body, hire and supervise her. So it's your obligation to make sure she does her job well and to your standards. That doesn't mean that you oversee everyone else in the city. So you have one employee, and that's Michelle. So Michelle then gets to supervise and hire and fire and all of that, everyone else. So with that, the conflict that sometimes arises in cities is when a councilor gets a big head and thinks, well, I'm the supervisor of Michelle, so that must mean I'm at the top of the chain of command and I can give commands to everyone else. So you're at the airport telling Shelley what to do. You're downstairs telling Jim what to do. No, that's not your role. Your role is only with Michelle. And so Michelle, by the city charter, is the one who supervises everyone else.
And our role is not, as an individual counselor, providing oversight to Michelle. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. So, yes. So the slide is council, not counselor as employer. So you as a body are the employer, not anyone individually. Good point. Thank you, Mayor. The final bullet there is the mayor acts as the point person, just because it is hard sometimes for a body of 7 to be a good day-to-day supervisor of an employee. So just by the nature of that process, the mayor is generally the point person for the council. But the mayor is not authorized to make decisions on Michelle's as an employee without coming back to you all. All right, now we change the title of the slide, and now it's councilor roles. So we have been talking about what's the authority of the council, of the body, and now we're gonna look at what are your roles as an individual. And this is the slide, for those who have seen my presentation before. This is the slide that I call my hat slide. What hat are you wearing? And so if you are wearing one of these hats and people don't understand what hat you're wearing, then you have a problem. You really want to be, if your audience doesn't know where you're coming from on this slide, then we have a problem. Because there's going to be confusion, and that leads to calling the attorney, and we don't want to do that. So if you are actually speaking for the city, you can have your city councilor hat on, and you can let your audience know I'm here speaking on behalf of the city, and this is what the city says. But you want to be careful, because you can only say what the city says if you've been delegated that authority. So if you're on the LCOG committee and the mayor is at a board meeting for LCOG, and they ask, well, what does the city of Crestwell think about this? Well, unless you all have talked about it and told the mayor what he can say, he's got to say, I'll have to get back to you. Because I haven't been delegated authority to say what the city of Crestwell thinks about this. I can tell you what I think about this, and the mayor can do that. He can put on his individual hat, make sure the audience understands, this is Mayor Stram talking as an individual, not on behalf of the city of Crestwell, and this is what I think, but I'll get back to you next month and tell you what the city thinks. And next month, he can put on his city hat and say, this is what the city thinks. Some other examples of where you need to make sure folks know what your hat says is if you're out campaigning.
So,
Mayor.
clear delegation versus assumed delegation.
Sure. So this is the risk-adverse, conservative nature of me as a city attorney. And this is to help keep you out of trouble and to make it really easy for your insurance company to say, yeah, I'll defend you. So if you have a delegation to go talk to LCOG at the board, your council has met and said, Mayor, we really want such and such to happen. We want you to represent to the LCOG board X and Y. And so you've been given that clear delegation. There's minutes of that delegation. It's crystal clear. And so you go and you tell the LCOG board X and Y. Well, that's where you want to be. You want it to be clear and crystal clear, hopefully in minutes, maybe in a motion, because if there's a problem down the road and there's a lawsuit and we call CIS and they say, well, the mayor did what? Well, the mayor went to LCOG and he said X and Y. Well, why do you say that? Well, because the council as a whole said you can go and say that. Here's the motion. And they're going, oh, so he was acting on behalf of the city when he said that. Oh, yeah. we'll hire an attorney for him, we'll defend him. If it's an assumed delegation, if you assume you have the authority, you may be right or wrong. But if it's not crystal clear, then it makes the insurance company's job a little bit harder, it makes my job a little bit harder to try to get you an attorney, try to get the city to pay for it. So it's not necessarily wrong to say, well, I believe I have the authority to say X and Y. Because we had all been talking about it, it seemed like it was consensus. But if it's not clear, then it can lead to problems. So I guess I will talk about the next sub bullet there, speaking individually. You absolutely have the First Amendment right to say what you want to say as an individual. So if you have your individual hat on, and everyone's clear that you have your individual hat on, you have the First Amendment right to say what you want to say. That sub bullet is just maybe think about the impact of my words on the organization I represent. So even though I'm wearing my individual hat, the words you say can have impacts on the city and on staff. I'm talking about morale. When you have someone who's known around town as a city councilor or the mayor, it's pretty hard to take that hat off, even if you're really clear. And you can be really clear about it. I'm not speaking on behalf of the city right now, but dang it, boy, that airport is shoddy. I don't know who they're got things running over there. You know, you can say that, and no repercussions other than, boy, maybe you've planted some seeds of morale problems at the city. So that's just think about your words sometimes. That's not a legal issue. That's just me providing some advice.
So it can get kind of fuzzy here when a counselor is asked, and maybe we're going to cover it under the media, by the media, or even by people in town, maybe a group. Well, we know the council's talking about such and such, and what do you think's going to happen? Or which way are you going to go on that? So the counselor says, well, you know, I'm not speaking for the city because we haven't decided that yet. But here's what I think. Here's where I'm going with it. Here's what I think is important. So now you're clearly speaking in your role about a city matter that's perhaps under discussion or coming up, and telling people what you think, while saying, but it's not the city's decision because we haven't decided. Do you have any words on that? Is that part of what our role is, to let people in the community know where we're at on things that are under discussion?
Absolutely, yeah, within reason. And again, some of this is legal and some of it is not legal. Just kind of like the impacts on the city and staff. I think we can talk about that within this context as well. So you will have no problem for me as a legal matter if you write a letter to the editor and you start by saying, yeah, I'm Mayor Stram, but I'm writing this letter to the editor as an individual. This is not a city position. And then you state what you want to say and you sign it, Dave Stram, in his individual capacity. You know, you can be crystal clear so everyone understands what hats he's wearing. So as a legal matter, I will look at that letter and say, well, it looks like he did everything right. But again, what are the impacts of what you say? And maybe it's impacts on your colleagues. Well, how come he didn't say that at the last meeting? How come he saved it for the paper? That's not very friendly. We were going to talk about that at the next meeting, and now he's told us all what he thinks. And we haven't had a chance to debate it. So again, as a legal matter, no problem for me. Maybe problems with your colleagues, just on a personal level. Because again, we're a team here. We're operating as a team. We don't have to worry about the last one because you don't have a union here, thankfully, because there are some special problems speaking about union matters, and generally it's don't. Let your staff deal with that. And again, so this is a slide that says why we're talking about this, why we're talking about the authority of the council, why we're talking about the individual authority of counselors, and again, stay in your lane. So if there's a lawsuit and it relates to something that you did as a council or relates to something you did as a counselor, if you were in your lane, if you had a clear delegation of authority, if you were acting within the course and scope of your duties as a city councilor, then the lawsuit is not going to be against you. It's going to be against the city, and we have insurance. Insurance will hire a lawyer and will defend that case, and if for some reason you actually did do something wrong and we have to pay a judgment, that will not come out of your pocket. And so that's what I want to protect here for you all. We don't want you having to hire your own lawyer. We don't want you to have to pay your own judgment. That would be awful. So if you stay in your lane, everything's great. And so that's, again, the clear delegation versus assumed delegation. Assumed delegation is not necessarily bad. It just makes it a little harder for us. So we want to make it easy when we call up CIS, your insurance company, and say we've got a problem. We want them to say, we're on it. No questions asked. That's where we want to be. So the city has a duty to defend and indemnify you when you're acting in the course and scope of your role as a city councilor. That's where we want to be. This is a slide of just some illustrations of how you can get into individual trouble. So if you're out there spending city money without authority, there's actually a special statute that says, well, we can sue you and get the money back. So we don't want that happening. If you are committing ethical violations, we'll talk about that hopefully a little bit later. If you actually are found to have violated the ethics laws, you were not acting as a counselor when you did that. So the city isn't going to pick up that tab. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're out there campaigning and there's an elections law violation, that was you in your individual capacity. City's not going to pay your fine with the Secretary of State. We'll talk a little bit about public meetings. You can get into individual trouble if you are out there holding private meetings. Obviously, if you commit a crime, you're not acting on behalf of the city. You're going to do the time, not Michelle. And again, it just general civil action. So if the city gets sued and we figure out that, oh my goodness, the mayor was out there doing stuff he shouldn't have been doing, he didn't have any authority to do that. It doesn't happen very often, but we can send him on his own. Sorry, Mayor, you have to hire your own attorney. All right, transition to the next subject. Any questions so far?
Anybody need a break, restroom or anything like that? If you do, during the next hour while we're going, just hop up and run. All right, we'll just keep it moving. Any other questions yet? You gotta put him on the spot, he likes that. Plus, that way he'll start using you for the illustration instead of me.
Right.
It's so great to have you back.
Oh, well, thank you. To pick on me.
All right, public meetings. So this really is the most important slide, and it's the last bullet. If you have a question about public meetings, that's why you have Roberta, that's why you have Michelle. Ask questions. They're your best resource. And if for whatever strange reason they're stumped, they can call me. And I can fumble my way through the answer with them. But your staff are very experienced. They know this stuff, and they can help you out. But we'll talk a little bit about it anyway. So this is a quote from the statute. This is the actual public meetings law, and it's the purpose section of the meetings law. And it describes why we are holding public meetings and what these public meetings are supposed to do. And it says we're supposed to have an informed public that is aware of your deliberations and your decisions and the information that you use to make those decisions. So those three underlined words. You're supposed to deliberate in public, make decisions in public, and gather information in public. And this is known as a sunshine law, adopted back in the 70s after the Watergate era and the backdoor dealings that people saw back then. And they said, hey, wait a minute, all of this stuff should be happening out in the sunshine, out in the view of the public. And so Oregon, like a lot of states back then, adopted the public meetings law. That was good foresight. The problem is that they haven't really updated it very much. So we have a 1970s law that is trying to regulate what we're doing here with live streaming and email and texting that were, never envisioned in the 1970s. So there are some fumbling points. There's some things to figure out. There's some interpretations going on as we try to apply this old law to new technology.
So my question has to do with information. First when we said it was 70s law, 50 years later, information, we get information like that. So how does this regulate counselors gathering all kinds of information about something they're going to have a decision to make, and they're gathering gobs of information on their own from every source they can, and then of course they bring that with them to the meeting?
That's a great question, and it's a tough one, again, and it is the nature of the law, the old nature of the law to the new standards. But I think back then, we had encyclopedias, I remember having the Britannicas at home, the World Book. This law doesn't forbid you from having experiences and knowledge and gaining those experiences and knowledge and bringing those to the table. What we're concerned about is deliberating as a quorum based upon the information that isn't out there in the public. So if you bring something to the table and share it with folks outside before you come in, and now a quorum has the information that you gathered, and you come in here and then deliberate without mentioning it, I think that could be a problem. Is there a case that says that? No.
So sharing that information with other counselors away from the public meeting?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and even it's a little bit even more fine-tuned than that. If we really want to get down to legal technicalities, it's something that you have on the upcoming agenda. It's something that's at issue for the council. So if you know you're going to be talking about the 4th of July in the next couple of months, and you are in the hallways sharing information about that issue with folks, and pretty soon you've shared it with a quorum, that could be a problem. But if you're just sharing information, how's the city going? How's Michelle doing? How's staff? What's morale like? You can talk about the city. You can share information about the city. You don't want to. It's the connection of deliberations. So these are the requirements of a public meeting, and this is why this is the sunshine of a public meeting. So everyone gets notice. We post our agenda. The space is accessible. So we have an open door downstairs. There's an elevator. People can walk in and leave whenever they want. We have Roberta recording the voting that takes place. Roberta has a copy of my PowerPoint presentation, so it is now part of the public record for this meeting. And as we've been talking about, we have a new law that says you can attend all our meetings electronically. So we have live streaming. And if people want to participate electronically, we'll have a process for them to do that according to this new new law, HB 2560, that was effective January 1. So this is the statute that we violate if we're doing something wrong. This statute says a quorum of a governing body, which is the city council here, may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating towards a decision. And that deliberating towards is part of that information gathering process too. On any matter except as otherwise provided in the law, so unless you meet in public, basically. So this is the 1970s statute that a court is going to have to look at and figure out, well, did they meet or not? And this is where this is the technology advance of an old statute and a current court trying to figure out whether there was a meeting or not in private. And this is where we get the notion of, well, maybe meeting is not so rigid. Maybe we can actually meet and not all be in the same room. Maybe we can actually meet, maybe not even at the same time, or maybe not even the same context. Someone can be on the phone with someone else, someone can be texting someone else, someone can send an email and reply to it a day later. At what point does all that activity generate a meeting in private? And so that's what we're worried about, is this old 1970s law and trying to interpret it with our new technology and what it means to meet. And we have a couple cases from our own Lane County that tried to interpret these statutes with the newfangled technology of the day. And as people have heard me before, but I know not everyone has heard this before. So we had the Lane County Commission, 5 members on the commission. They had a difficult issue to decide on their supplemental budget, whether they were going to spend money to hire assistants for the commissioners themselves. So was each commissioner going to have an FTE or a part of an FTE assistant to help them do their job? Commissioners get paid, it's a job. It was a sensitive subject. It was spending public money, and not everyone thought that was a great idea. And so they were afraid to have that discussion in a public meeting. They didn't want to come out and say, well, I really want an assistant because my job is so hard. That didn't come across very well in the public. So they had email exchanges. They actually went across the street to what was then at the time the Hilton, the hotel, which is now the Graduate. They had two members would meet at the bar, and then 2 different members would meet at the bar, and then they would send some emails back and forth. And then it came time to, the agenda item was up, so they walked into their public meeting, and there was a motion to approve the supplemental budget. There was a second to approve that motion, and then there was a vote, and the motion passed. And then they got up and left. And the register guard, who happened to be in the audience at the time, said, wait a minute, that was a really controversial issue. There was no discussion. There must have been some discussion outside. They couldn't have just voted like that. So yes, this was an egregious case, really bad facts, but what we get out of that is you don't have to be in the same room at the same time. It doesn't even have to be conversational. It could be email. And the judge says they were having these outside discussions for the purpose of avoiding the sunshine. They were having these hard discussions in private, so they didn't have to have them in front of the people. That really offended the judge. He thought it was against the purpose of the whole public meetings law to begin with. They were having these deliberations that were supposed to take place in public, in private. So as we know, it actually ended in a settlement because the county saw the writing on the wall. And so 2 of the commissioners, who were the most egregious violators of the provision, they had to pay $20,000 each out of their own pocket. The county did not pick that up. But then the county also had to pay the plaintiffs who brought the lawsuit $350,000 out of their general fund. The county is a self-insured, they didn't have insurance. And my guess is actually that CIS would not cover this type of claim anyway. So that's real money, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Stay in your lane, know the rules. Hey, wait a minute, are we avoiding? Am I talking to you in order to avoid talking to you in public? Well, a little red flag should be going off. Are we having this hard discussion out in the hall when we should be having this hard discussion out on the dais? A little red flag should be going off. And let's talk to Roberta, let's talk to Michelle, figure out what's going on here. Am I doing something wrong? Do we need to call Ross? Let's ask him some questions. There was a subsequent case, also out of that same fact scenario, where we got some additional law where the court actually said yes and confirmed that contemporaneous gathering of a quorum is not required to meet. So you can meet if you're not all in the same room, if it's not all at the same time. So they're bringing this 1970s law into the current. They're saying, yeah, there's all this technology we have available. Meet is not just sitting down at a table. We can meet in other ways. And those other ways include what's available in our pockets with a phone, or with texting, or instant messaging, or whatever my daughter does with her phone. And so when you have a series of communications between members of the city council, whether it's in person, on the phone, via text, and you're doing that on a matter that's coming up on the agenda in the future, or you know it's going to come up on the future agenda, then red flags. And let's hold off, let's ask some questions, let's figure out what is the right way to handle this. We did get one benefit out of this case, and that is confirming that administrative matters are okay. So when Roberta sends you an email and says, hey, can we have a special meeting tomorrow at 5 o'clock? Does that work for everyone? You can reply to that. Or you can reply amongst yourselves and say, well, 5 doesn't work, but 4 works. Well, tomorrow doesn't work, but how about Friday? You can have that type of administrative discussion, and it's not a meeting. There's some sanity in the law.
Not a meeting about a meeting.
Right, that's right. It's a pretty small exception, though. I mean, it really is about scheduling. For some of my fire district clients, they have to have 2 signers on a lot of their checks. So 2 board members have to come in and sign checks, and if someone's sick, or they'll send an email out and say, hey, I can't make it today, can you come in and sign checks? And people start replying all and say, well, I can't do it, or I can do it, but not until 3 o'clock. You know, that type of exchange, hey, can someone come in and sign checks? That's an administrative matter, and that's not a meeting. So we're okay there. But again, it's a pretty finite exception, and it really is those administrative type matters. So these are my practical tips. These are not legal tips. These are again, I'm a very conservative attorney when I provide advice to my clients. I want to keep you out of trouble. And so I fully recognize that you cannot 100% adhere to all these tips all of the time. I recognize that. I also recognize that this can make your job harder. I'm not sure if I'm sorry about that or not, but I recognize it. So the first one I think is just kind of an obvious, just get in the habit of not replying, especially replying all, to emails you get either from another counselor or from staff. Just be in that habit. Because that's just the jumping off point for a meetings problem, is when you have staff saying, here's the agenda for next week. Now remember, we're gonna be talking about the budget, so please read the budget document. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have a question about the budget document. How come we're spending that much money on police services? Well, I think we should be spending more, whoa, wait a minute. All of a sudden we're deliberating on what we're supposed to be deliberating next week. So just, and again, it's not a legal requirement. Yes, Mayor.
So I sent out an email, I think I included Tammy Sue and Norma Jean, maybe 2 weeks ago, about counselors attending training sessions in the new year. Remember that email? And did I send it to two of you, maybe? And it was about LOC conferences, trainings, things like that. There's money in the budget for you to go, encouragement, and also the process, how you go about doing that. If you want to attend something, alert me, give me the information when it is, how much it costs. Then I talk to Michelle and Jim and figure out how much we have in the budget, make sure, and then I give approval, yep, that's a great one to go to, money's there. Then you sign up with a bird. It was information. So that's the kind of thing that they could reply to email all, but it's better if they reply just to me, saying, thanks, I got that from you, and I'm really interested in this coming next month, or does that qualify as an administrative business?
That's probably an administrative issue. I would be willing to stand up in front of a judge and argue that case. But again, is it a good practice to say, well, I just got this from the mayor, I'm just gonna reply to him? It seems like an administrator matter, but I'm not really sure, and I'm in a habit of never hitting reply all. That's just a good habit to be in, I think, as a city councilor. The next two bullets are very similar, and they get to the issue of what is an intermediary. An intermediary, when we're talking about public meetings, is this scenario. We have Counselor A talking with Counselor B. And they're talking about something that's going to be on the agenda coming up. Maybe it's the budget. They're talking about the budget. They have concerns about the budget. They're feeling each other out a little bit. That's not a quorum. Two people can talk. So we have no public meetings issue at all. Counselor B has now learned what Counselor A thinks about the budget, and Counselor B goes and talks to Counselor C and D. That's not a quorum. That's just three members. So they can sit there and hash it out. They can talk about issues. But Counselor B has Counselor A's opinion in their pocket. Counselor B is the intermediary. And so what we actually have, potentially, is a quorum. Even though it's only three people talking there, and it was two before. If Counselor B was the intermediary, took that opinion with them to that other group, we now maybe have a quorum problem. And so I say, as an individual, avoid those opportunities where either you are giving someone else your opinion or you're taking someone else's opinion. So that those are the second and third bullet are just reverses of those. So if you avoid sharing your opinion, then if I'm talking to the mayor, I don't want to make the mayor an intermediary. So, and the mayor doesn't want to become an intermediary. So he's saying, we can talk about this, but I don't really want to know how you're going to vote. I don't want to know your firm opinion on this issue. Let's just talk about the issues. Let's get some facts out. Those conversations are fine. But when you start giving your opinion or taking someone else's opinion, we're creating problems. Again, the analogy I like to think is taking someone else's opinion and putting it in your pocket and then walking down the road and seeing another counselor, oh, hey, I was just talking to the mayor. He's going to vote no on that. Yeah, that's an egregious example, but that's the stuff we're worried about. these are my, again, non-legal tips. Just based upon experience, having done this for a while now, how to have an effective meeting, how to have a productive meeting, how to get along with your fellow counselors, how to leave at night smiling still. I think it's incredibly important to have a realistic agenda. The mayor has seen this before, and we have talked about this before. And I thought it was heartwarming when the mayor talked about your upcoming meeting and warned you that it could be long. Because I think in the back of his mind was like, oh, Ross is gonna hate this. Ross doesn't like long meetings. He's giving me the stink eye. I realize that sometimes you can't avoid long meetings, especially budget season. You know, they bring out those discussions, and you have to have those discussions. You have to do it in public. So I recognize it, but to the extent you can, keep your agendas realistic in terms of timing, but also in terms of subject matter. Sometimes you can have weighty issue after weighty issue after weighty issue, and you are dead after 60 minutes. Whereas if you had spread those out a little bit, you could have gone for 90. You know, just that type of thing. Roberta is excellent at this. You get the materials before the meeting, and you have the weekend to digest them at your own leisure. None of this sending out stuff the night before when I can't expect, you're volunteers, I can't expect you to have read that when I want you to read it. Give me the opportunity to read it at my own time. I'll set it aside. You can get into a habit. You know, Sunday night is my time to go through the packet, or Friday afternoon is my time. You know, just set aside your time, get into a habit, and do it at your own time. And getting those materials out allows you to do that. We don't need to walk through all of it. I think public participation is important, but it does not mean a public conversation on every single thing. We have public hearings, and the public is allowed to come. We have public comment, and they're allowed to come up here and have their 3 minutes or 5 minutes. I forget what you guys do. 3. But as soon as you start getting feedback as you're taking motions, as you're doing your business, as soon as you start getting hecklers from the audience saying, oh, you guys shouldn't phrase the motion that way, you should say it this way. They should let you do your job. They can watch you do your job, and they had their chance to speak, but now it's your time. And so I think there are limits to public participation, and I think that's okay. Now, for several years, you guys use work sessions very well. I think that's great. Some cities still don't. It's just, it's brutal sometimes. Because if you want to hash through an issue, the best way to do it is a work session. This gets you all, just the attitude of this space, I think it's been shown by people smarter than me, that if you are all sitting at the same level in the circle looking at each other, there's a difference than sitting on the dais. And so you have different interactions with each other. And so this is a great space to have those longer, more in-depth discussions. And the last one I will go in is the last bullet. And it goes back to public meetings in general, is you have to get comfortable having those discussions in public. You owe it to your constituents, you owe it to yourself to tell your fellow counselors how you feel. And it's hard sometimes. Sometimes these are emotional issues. Sometimes these are, your opinion may not be the popular opinion. But you owe it to your fellow counselors to express that. And be honest in doing so. Another transition slide.
Around the rest of time.
What do you consider a long meeting?
What I consider a long meeting. Again, I think it depends on the so a 90-minute meeting where it's just tough issue after tough issue, I think by the end of that, people's minds are jelly, and I think there are studies on this issue, and I think your ability to make those tough decisions really starts to wane, and I think it's about 90 minutes or so for those really tough. But a 2-hour meeting, I think 2 hours is generally my cutoff, because not every issue is. You're talking about reports, you're adopting minutes, you're talking about other things, and so 2 hours, I think you're still fresh enough, and you still have the ability to make reasonable decisions and use your mind. That's kind of where I am. And I understand you have to do it sometimes. You just have to stuff has to get done. Staff needs decisions. Got an opportunity, and they need to act on it fast, and this is our only meeting this month, things happen, I get it. But I just cringe when I hear staff talk about, well, we had another 4-hour meeting today. After last week's 4-hour meeting, like, oh, no wonder you don't have any people who want to sign up for this job. I mean, it's just brutal. You're volunteers, you have other lives. So that's my opinion.
I think that's true, that they say that the average person's attention span is about 45 minutes on a good day, so.
Yeah.
So to actually put, even 2 hours is probably even stretching it.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk public meetings really quickly, because really the crux is this first slide. What is a public record? And the answer is basically everything. So, for instance, we have an agenda for the meeting tonight. That is a public record. It's created by Roberta. She sends it out. She maintains it. If you start taking notes on that agenda, you've now created a separate public record. So now we have 2 public records. I don't need to see every copy, so if you didn't take any notes on it, then there's just still one agenda, even though there's 7 copies floating around. But if you take minutes, if you take notes about city business on that record, then you've created a new record. If your notes are, remember to bring flowers home, that's probably not a new record, because that's not city business.
And this would probably even be a good time to clarify that as we're creating these public records here and writing things down and stuff like that, then we're supposed to hang on to these and then turn them in to Roberta at some point in time. All right, and when do you want to receive those? Once a year, once every quarter?
Whenever you want to give them to me,
Yeah, and then they just get thrown in a box, or do you scan them
they
and?
get put in the file
Yeah.
in the archive room.
I actually have a question about that.
Yeah.
So, because I'm a writer, so if we had a packet like pre-tablet days, and we would have a packet, but I would write only on the first page, does that whole packet have to be submitted, or it's that individual page?
Yeah, just that page, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My box might be smaller. Okay.
Yeah.
Would I have to write the date if the date's not on there
No,
of the pack? Okay,
no.
okay.
I-
Thank you.
I don't know, and city recorders are different, and I don't wanna step on toes, but my preference, I guess, individually, is I would like each counselor to have a binder, maybe, or a file that says 2022. And this is where all of my records for 2022 live. And so as you're taking notes, scratch pads, whatever, it just makes it easier, I think, on you. And then at the end of the year, you just say, hey, here you go, Roberta, present. She may want it more often than that, but it probably depends on how prolific you are.
Can I throw a question at Roberta for a second? So let's say that we have a council packet that's 150 pages, I'm just gonna throw that out there, and we write on 2 of them during the meeting. You need that whole packet, just 2 pages?
Okay.
But then
Because
you
I
would,
have the original of the other 150.
but on the page, usually there's something that identifies what page out of what document it is, because it would be, like this one here, if I didn't have the rest of this in context, you wouldn't know really where it came from. So I guess,
I've seen these pages for years now.
okay.
And I'm sorry, and it's usually the January or February of each year, so.
I mean, like Misty was saying, I think I could probably thin my stuff out a little bit if I took out just the pages I wrote on, but as long
They're
as.
different, they're in a different order this year. They are awesome.
What's that?
I was holding on to the whole packet.
Yes, exactly, same, so.
Okay.
And again, my idea of a binder or a file folder that's called 2022 would help put that in context. And actually, I mean, we're under no obligation really to provide the context. The record is the record. And so, you know, if there's a public records request for minutes from the council, or scribbles from the council, we don't have to necessarily tell them, well, this is from March, this is from February, this is from June. You know, the record is the record, so.
We also have to be careful not to do drawings and things like that, because you never know what people think of those.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's not any of my clients, but I mean, you definitely see those public records cases from time to time where you know, someone in the audience notices that Counselor A or B has been doodling, and just maybe to be an ass, they say, I want to see those doodles. You know, or those derogatory comments. Well, Counselor Z was being an ass today, you know. Well, let's publish those in the paper. That'll be great, you know. So it's just be wary.
I think we'll get into it, but also like texting and,
I was gonna ask that,
yeah,
or emailing during a
that's why you shouldn't do
meeting.
it during the meeting.
Yeah, let's not broadcast that we're creating records here. We will. I mean, that is a bit of an open question, because like the public meetings law, the public records law was developed in the 70s and uses words like fax machine. Does not use words like texting. Does not use the word IM, DM. So yeah, I mean, it's you're forcing a court to then interpret that 70s law into the current age, and we don't always know where they're going to land. So is a city councilor up on the dais during the meeting texting another city councilor? Is that part of the deliberations? Or is that their use of a private phone with a friend? I mean, we don't actually have a ruling on that. I don't know, really. I think you could make an argument either way. That, well, sir, I mean, I was watching them. They were deliberating. They were just doing it quietly. And so I think there's a good argument. Well, maybe they were making public records. I think sometimes there's a mistake made by public officials that the public records law is a confidentiality law, that it helps us keep records private. It's the opposite. It's a sunshine law, again, just like the meetings law. And so in order to keep a document from being public, we have to find an exemption. So we have to look at every document, and sometimes even every portion of a document, if we want to keep it secret, and we have to make our case why this shouldn't be released. And then sometimes there's an overriding policy under the public records law to provide that information to the public. So even a confidential record can become public because there's a public policy behind doing so, or because the requester is a public requester, like a newspaper. Newspapers usually are given more leeway in terms of getting documents than others. So I can argue for the city that, no, that's a private document, that's privileged, we shouldn't let it go. But the newspaper's saying, well, the public has a right to know, I'm a newspaper, I'm gonna publish a story about that. The public has a right to know. That could be a little bit different than if it's a business who says, I want that information because I want to sell that person something. You know, those are different arguments. And the court might rule differently, depending on who's asking. City recorder is the records custodian, and I implore you to cooperate with Roberta. So when the city gets a public records request, she's in charge of that. And if she thinks that some of the records might be in your possession, you should respond to her. She's on timelines. The law has changed a little bit over the years, and now she's got a pretty tight timeline to turn those around. And so if you're stalling, if you're not responding to her, then you're making her job a lot harder. These are my practical tips for public records. You should all have a city email address. And I assume you all have private email addresses. One is for city business and one is not. And you should always keep those separate. We want to be able to have you stand up in front of a court or sign an affidavit that says, I never use my private email address for city business. If you can say that, then there's no reason to look. There's no reason for the judge to say, well, bring in that laptop. We need to look through it. So it's for your own it's for your own protection and sanity. If you can, limit the creation of public records. And some people think by writing, and so I'm not discouraging you from doing that. Some people go through the deliberative process with their pen in their hand, and that's how I got through law school. So sometimes you have to write down things, so I'm not discouraging you from doing that. But if you can, just remember everything you're doing is creating a public record if it's about city business. And so if there are ways that you can alter your workflow, if there are tactics that you can use to limit that, that's just, I think it makes things a little bit easier. Again, it's not a legal requirement, it's more of a Roberta sanity requirement. And then lastly, again, just respond to staff. If they get a public records request, they have a legal obligation to respond. They have a legal obligation to do so in a certain number of days. And so you need to partner with them in fulfilling those obligations.
Question for you. So this goes back to like media contact. So say for instance that you get contacted by the media on your personal email address about a city matter. In that particular case, would it be best to ask them to forward their question to your city email address so that you can respond properly from that? And conversely, I've kind of done the same thing when sometimes I might get a question regarding a campaign thing, and it'll come to the city email address, and I say, this is a campaign thing, send it to my personal. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so I totally agree on the second one, because you should not be using city resources for campaigning, so I think you should try to cut that off. The first one, I think, I'm not as wedded to how to deal with that. It's more of a style issue, and I understand that sometimes, especially with a constituent, telling them, I can't answer you on my private email, you have to email my city email address. Send that same thing you just sent me to a different email address. that can come across a little weird sometimes. So I think there are two ways to do it. There's one is to tell them, no, this is my private email, please send it to the city. Or you can forward it to your city account. And then respond from your city account.
I guess
So-
it might also have to do with how you're responding, because if they're asking your opinion as an individual, wearing your individual hat, then sure, you could probably say, as an individual, you know, from my individual personal email account, then I'm saying this. But if you're responding back as an official, something that the city would say, from the city's perspective, then you probably want to put that on your city email and be sure to do it that way, I would think.
I think you should deal with city business on the city email, but just make sure people know what hat you're wearing when you respond. So I think there's an easier distinction
Okay.
for yourself. I'm just trying to make it easier on you.
Mhm.
I think if it's about city business, I will respond, I will communicate with my city email. And then I will let the audience know, hey, I'm individual counselor responding to you here, or on behalf of the city, I can tell you X, Y, and Z. So that's where you want to make sure they know which hat you're wearing.
So now you mentioned forwarding, and that brings up a question I've had. So prior to counselors having these wonderful little devices, we all had emails and used our personal devices, whatever those were, to get city email, and then we responded that way. But I'm a paper person, so Roberta would send things out, and I would get them on my city email, and I'd print them off at home. And then I have the paper copy of whatever she sent out. Well, now on this device, it's not hooked up to my computer, to my printer, so I get something, I can't print it. Or, for instance, I have an LCOG board meeting. Last week it was Lane mayors, and there's Zoom on this. Well, my 63-year eyes don't do too well for 2 hours watching something on that. So I have a dilemma. If I get an email from Roberta saying, here's something for you, and it's 5 pages long or a page long, can I forward it to my personal laptop and then print it?
So just, again, these are not legal requirements. I'm trying to preserve your sanity. And I think for purposes of sanity, in your example, I would say what you're forwarding is just a mechanical process to print it. It's part of hitting print. You forward it to this email address and then you print it. So I think you could, again, if we have to sign an affidavit, we have to get you in front of the judge. You can say, I don't do city business on my personal account. The only reason that I might have a city email on my personal account is because I print from there.
Well, I don't have a city email on my personal account.
The
I email it from the
email,
city
the email,
to my personal, and then I just print it off.
right. So I don't think you're creating a new record there. I would be okay with that.
So what about the whole Zoom thing? I can do Zoom on my laptop for 2 hours, but I can hardly do this. So now I'm doing business as LCOG member or Mayor's Roundtable, and I'm participating in the Zoom meeting. I'm not creating any records, though. I'm just participating in a meeting via Zoom. And I send the link. I get it here to my city email. I forward the link to my personal email, and I can bring it up and I can access the meeting on my laptop.
Yeah, again, I'm okay with that. Again, I think it's a mechanical process that you're using to, and the Zoom is being, you're not the custodian of that Zoom. It's LCOG or whoever, the mayors. Someone else is running that meeting, and they should be either recording it or taking minutes of it. So the Zoom you're watching live is not a record.
So I mean, I guess in that sense, it wouldn't matter if because you can hook these up to your TV, have a bigger screen, all kinds of things to make it easier to participate, but you're not creating a record.
Right.
Just questions that I had since I was given one of these wonderful devices and
That's right.
practical questions for me.
Yeah, again, I think that's more of a mechanical process that you're using to either print or view something. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna run through ethics. But before we get there, so I don't know if you all know, but you are all mandatory reporters, starting January 1 of this year. So that means child abuse, elder abuse, and vulnerable adult abuse. So if you witness abuse of any of those categories of folks, you are now required to make a report. And you make a report by calling DHS, there's a 1-800 number at DHS, or by contacting local law enforcement. This is not a mandatory reporting training. We could go into that for quite a while. I just wanted to flag that for you. There actually is a really, DHS, if you actually on YouTube, you can search for DHS mandatory reporting training, and there is about a 30-minute video about child abuse reporting. They make it pretty easy, and it's a good, I recommend it. It's good. It doesn't strictly apply to elder or adult abuse, but the concepts are all very similar. And you don't, I guess the main thing, people are worried about making reports, and it's a serious issue, but you don't get into trouble if you make a report. You get into trouble if you don't make a report. So DHS will tell you, if there's a question, make the report.
And that's any time.
24/7.
Yep.
It used to be while on the job, but that is no longer the case. So once you are an elected official, once you are on the council, you are a mandatory reporter 24/7. All right, so I am going to truncate my talk a little bit. I'm going to talk about ethics in general, what I'm seeing from the Ethics Commission, and then I'm going to talk about one of our ethics rules. So let me tell you about what I am seeing in terms of trends in the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. And this is just what I see in my practice. This is what I do every day. So we see a lot of this. I follow the Ethics Commission, see what they're doing. We practice in front of them sometimes. They are, I think, over the last 5 years, more aggressive in their investigations. Generally, an ethics issue starts with a complaint, usually someone in the audience or a neighbor, an opponent says, I think Counselor Y is doing something wrong, so I'm going to file a complaint. That's not the only way a complaint starts. The Ethics Commission has a clipping service, and so they read newspaper articles from across the state, and they will generate their own complaints if they see something fishy reported in the newspaper. And they have a number of investigators, they have a number of staff. They have one in particular who's now been there for 4 or 5 years, and she is an attorney. She was an attorney general down in Arizona, and she is very smart, she's very capable, but she is tenacious. And I can work fine with her. She's fairly reasonable, but she does not let things go. She will follow the facts where they lead, and she will ask the tough questions. And I guess that's part of another trend we've seen over the last several years is expanded investigations. So you will have a complaint come in on one thing, and she will investigate that and find 2 or 3 more things. It used to be they would they were pretty confined to the complaint. They wanted to solve the complaint and get it done. She wants to find all of the problems. She looks under all the rocks. I'm not faulting her for doing her job. She's just very capable at it. So that is another trend we're seeing is expanded investigations. There was a law change a few years ago that cut down on their time limits, that changed their time limits. So when a complaint comes in, the staff have to make an initial report to the commission, I think within 30 days or something. And then the commission decides whether to continue the investigation or not. 30 days is not enough time for a busy staff to complete an investigation and give a thorough report to the commission. So what they end up doing is giving a basic report and recommending that they open an investigation. So almost everything, unless it's clearly not an ethics issue, almost everything generates an open investigation. And then she goes to town, requesting records, doing interviews, looking under every rock. And we've seen these investigations not only expand in scope, but expand in time. So investigations are taking longer. So you've got this complaint hanging over your head. It used to hang over your head for a month or two. Now it's hanging over your head for 3 or 4 months. And that is not a great position to be in. It's just a stress. It's a worry. It's just hanging out over there. We have, on the flip side, we have seen them settle more cases. So she seems to be, once she's finished her investigation, she seems more willing to settle cases, sometimes for just what they call letters of education, which is, I did something wrong and I won't do it again, I'll do better. Or sometimes for pretty nominal fines, $100, $200 of a fine. They seem to be more willing to resolve cases that way. But just the fact that it is taking longer, it's hanging over your head, they're expanding, it's just stressful. So I've a lot of frayed nerves from elected officials and public officials in my line of work. Yeah, so, and I guess the last piece to add there is your insurance coverage. So CIS provides limited insurance coverage for ethics complaints, but it is on a reimbursement basis, and it's only if you are found not guilty. So, we're talking about an expanded investigation that expands in time as well. So if you want an attorney, you have to hire an attorney and pay for them over those 4 agonizing months. And just length of time means it's more expensive because every time the attorney picks up the file and has to remind themselves or has to send another letter or respond to another question from the investigator, that's just more attorney time. And so we're seeing more and more expenses being generated. And if you enter into a settlement agreement, that means you're admitting that you did something wrong, and that means CIS is off the hook for coverage. So they're only going to reimburse you for your attorney's fees if you are not guilty, and they're only going to reimburse you for $2,500. I'm sorry, but $2,500 doesn't go very far when you're paying an attorney. So those are the trends. It's not all it's kind of a downer. But again, I will. The main investigator we're dealing with is very capable and she's tenacious, but she is at the end of the day reasonable, and we are seeing settlement agreements. So if you do have a complaint, just you have to suck it up and go through the motions. Don't hide. She will find the facts. So cooperate. It's always better to cooperate and just get it over with. I am going to talk I'm gonna jump ahead to my third rule, which is conflicts of interest.
We're not gonna talk about the but-for test?
I was not going to, do you want me to?
That's a good rule.
Okay, we'll do that one instead. Okay, rule number 1, don't use your position for personal gain. And this is the rule. A public official cannot use their position, so a city councilor cannot use your position as city councilor